Welcome back to Introduction to World Music, Music 239. Today we embark on another Asian culture, one of the oldest cultures in the world, that of India. And as we do, can anybody tell me what the word palimpsest means? Did you run into that word palimpsest in your reading? It's early on in the chapter, and if you have not done the reading yet, you'll run into this. It was a term that was used as an analogy for India by the former Prime Minister of India, Nehru, in the 1940s and 50s, to represent the Indian culture, because a palimpsest is a parchment on which materials are written and then written over the top of that, and then over the top of that, again and again, so that the original writing is still there underneath, but then over the top, more and more and more is written. And as we've studied Asian cultures so far in China, we've seen how the old and the new are juxtaposed in interesting and intriguing kinds of ways. India will be no exception to this, because here we are dealing with an extremely old civilization. Your PowerPoint has a brief history on it showing some of the periods of Indian civilization dating back to 2500 BC for some of the oldest ones. The English colonial period from 1600 to 1947 was also highly influential in India's history as well, in helping to shape the way the music is today. We'll look at all of these issues as we go through, but realize that this is an extremely old culture, one of the oldest ones in civilization. Hinduism is the dominant religion. Muslim is also present, about 10% of the population overall. But as you go from north to south, those percentages change, so that in the north of India, the Muslim concentration is actually much higher, and the Hindu population is less. So in the south, it's the reverse of that. So be aware of that particular change. Also, the caste system is an important aspect of the Indian culture. Hereditary sort of place in society where you could not rise above or below. Does that remind you of anything we've studied before?
The Jalolo from Africa.
The Jalolo from Africa, also the Lunsi drummers. Both of those were cultures in which you had to be born into that clan in order to be one of those people. So the caste system is not unique to the Indian culture, but it is much more prevalent in India than it is in other countries, because it is so universal throughout the whole country. Really a subcontinent. Okay. The belief in Islam, as I've said, is about 10%. And we talked about the palimpsest. You find that on your PowerPoint slide as well. A fifth of the world's population, living in an area that is essentially the size of the east coast of the United States. Okay, imagine that kind of population clustered together in such a small space. 15 major languages, 5,000 years of history. All of these are going to be components that have an effect on the music. As I said before, there is a difference between North and South India. The North is known as the Hindustani area, even though the Hindu religion is actually smaller there than it is in the South. It's actually more of a Muslim concentration there. Whereas in the South, there's more of a Hindu concentration and what is known as the Carnatic Plains. Okay, this is a large plateau area from which much of the music that we are going to study in this class comes. Carnatic music. And of course, one of the major symbols of India, I have that picture on the PowerPoint of the Taj Mahal. English influence. There's a number of them. Buildings, a lot of the buildings are left over from the English time there. Railways, bureaucracy, universities, and also a number of the instruments from the European styles. But interestingly, although the Indian cultures adopted the instruments, they did not adopt the European styles of music as much as we see in, say, Japan. So the instruments were brought in, and you see a wide use of violin, clarinet, piano, saxophone, guitar. Okay? These instruments are used to play music in Indian style rather than bringing the European style of music in. And so there's definitely a cultural influence there, but not so much as you might expect. Now, literature and religion play very important parts in Indian culture, and the writing is done in Sanskrit. And there are two epics that were written a couple thousand years ago that are extremely important to Indian culture, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, both of which are important literature texts from which the texts for many of the songs are taken. So as you start to hear Indian music, be aware that a lot of the music comes from these particular texts. And then there's important religious works as well. The four Vedas, the Upanishads, Puranas, all of these are old and important religious texts from which musical references will be made as well. Now, as we start to study the music of this culture, we're going to look at three different categories, starting with pop music, and within that category you can also put cine music, C-I-N-E, pronounced cine, which comes literally from cinema. Just like if you go down to the Campbell 16 Cine, okay? That's the same principle. So film is extremely important in India, and a lot of the music associated with film is something that permeates this culture. Then we'll also look at Indian classical music, and devotional song. There's a song called a bhajan, for example, that we will be looking at. So these three categories are going to be extremely important as we start to study this music. Now, the popular music, and particularly that associated with the film, the cine music, is a very curious blend of East and West. And I want to play you an example that's on your CD. It's called Engal Kalyanam, okay, and it comes from a movie from the 1960s. It is definitely dated, okay. When you hear this, you're going to be struck by stylistically how much like it sounds like the West, but not the West of today. It sounds like something that you might have heard if you were around in the 60s and 70s. You might have heard this kind of thing on TV. To me, it sounds like a 60s TV commercial in some ways. And it has been taken and put into an Indian film, and a number of Western references are here, okay? But we have an interesting blend of East and West that it manifests itself in this song when you hear some of the other things that are going on. Okay, so as we start to listen to this, I want you to try to identify what are the elements that clearly come from the West and what might be determined to be a more Eastern element from what you know of Eastern music so far.
எங்கள் கல்யாணம் கலாட்டா கல்யாணம் எங்கள் கல்யாணம் கலாட்டா கல்யாணம் எங்கள் கல்யாணம் கலாட்டா கல்யாணம் எங்கள் கல்யாணம் கலாட்டா கல்யாணம் மாமனார் தான் வரவு வைக்க கல்யாண பந்தல் போட்டாரா காலையிலே திருமணமாம் மாலையிலே முதலிரவாம் வாழ்க காதல் கல்யாணம் எங்கள் கல்யாணம்.
Okay, this is music that just kind of hits you like with a frontal assault. There is nothing subtle about this at all. What's it about? Has anybody looked ahead and looked at the text that's printed in your book? Okay, it's from a movie. What's going on in the movie? That really helps when you hear something this strange and so completely foreign to all the other musics that we've heard in these cultures. When something like this hits you, you really need to look and see what is this all about. Okay? Well, you'll find this in your text, and it is basically translates as our wedding. And so there's a depiction of an Indian wedding going on, and the text reads, "Our wedding is a confusion wedding. Sons-in-law put up the money, and the father-in-law puts up the canopy to receive the gifts." Okay, so it goes into details on what goes on. Mother-in-law puts on eye makeup while the sons-in-law stare at her in the mirror. Okay, this is all ritual associated with an Indian wedding, and it's being sung in a style that is very reminiscent of 1960s Western television commercials. What elements, though, might we identify here that are more clearly Asian and Indian? If you listen to Indian music in general, one of the things that first strikes you is that you don't get the same sense of a note being something that is struck and then sustained, like the one I just played on the piano. A note in Indian music will be more reminiscent of a graph of, say, a line drawing that's going up and down quite a bit and all over the place. So the Indian sense of a note, and there's actually a name for that you find in your text. Okay, it's called a svara. If you look in your text at the graphs, figure 6-8, of the Indian notes, you see the comparison of the note played on the piano with a note or a svara in Indian music. And you see that it's really quite a different matter. So an Indian performer might have a note instead of la. An Indian note might be la, that kind of a thing. Now, go back and listen to the female vocalist singing in Ingal Kalyanam, okay? Listen to that song about our wedding and listen to the way that the female vocalist sings her verse.
மாப்பிள்ளைகள் செலவு செய்ய மாமனார் தான் வரவு வைக்க கல்யாண பந்தல் போட்டாரா காலையிலே திருமணமாம் மாலையிலே முதலிரவாம் வாழ்க காதல் கல்யாணம்
that? There's nothing Western about that at all. First of all, the tone production is very nasal. Where have we heard that before? Nasal tone production. China. We heard it in Chinese music. Okay, so that nasal tone production is very, very Eastern. What else? Did you hear the ornamentation and could you say maybe oscillation going on when those pitches were being sung? Highly ornamented kind of style that reminiscent of almost what we heard in the Minyo folk song, Nakatabushi, in the Japanese culture. So taking a song that is so clearly from a commercial enterprise, from a movie, and importing the particular Asian characteristic of the ornamentation there is what gives us the peculiar East meets West sound. The music sounds like Bing Crosby and Bob Hope movies, sort of 1940s comedies kinds of things, 1940s and 50s. Yeah, there is a real bizarre kind of mixture. And as you continue to listen to this recording on your own, you'll hear an imitation of a Woody Woodpecker voice. Okay, remember that cartoons? Everybody seen that? I know it's a little before your time, but you'll hear the imitation of that in this song. It is like just like the PowerPoint says, anything goes. It's like a musical grab bag that they will throw anything into, regardless of how bizarre it sounds in the juxtapositioning. And clearly, this is a bizarre piece of music. So enjoy the rest of it on your own. Spend some time with it, but you get a good laugh out of it if nothing else. But I think that it's important to understand how the East meets West kind of phenomenon happens in almost all of these cultures, and in India we see a clear example of it here. The most important constructional element of music in India has to do with two terms with which you need to become highly familiar: raga and tala. Raga and tala. Okay? And they are part of what makes music of North and South India similar. Okay? This is one of the similarities of these two styles. We're really going to be focusing our study on the south of India, but I will be referring to some northern Indian instruments and concepts as well. They both, however, have the ragas and talas in common. The difference is that in the north, they tend to be much more highly improvisational. Okay, much more open-ended and improvisational, whereas in the south, you get a lot of pre-composed devotional songs of a religious nature that are not nearly as improvisational as the ones that we see in the north. So what is a raga? What is a raga? Well, the Indians defined it as that which colors the mind and the heart. But in a typical Eastern fashion, this talks around the subject rather than saying exactly what a raga is. From a Western standpoint, a raga is a collection of pitches. Just like a scale, we would think of it as a scale. And it has its own syllables that go with it. Instead of what the West came up with do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, right? Instead of that, the Indian Melakarta system uses sa, ri, ga, ma, pa, da, ni, and sa. So it's just different syllables for what is essentially the same principle, although it's handled considerably differently in terms of the chromatics. Anybody know where do, re, mi, fa, so, where do those syllables come from? The solmization system, as it's known in the West, actually was invented by a monk named Guido d'Arezzo back in around the 10th century or so. And he got those syllables from popular hymn tunes, chants, if you will, from the church, which everybody knew in the culture. And everybody knew that the syllable that started with Re, for example, was it was actually a longer word, okay? Regina, for example, was the word that it came from. And so that Re syllable, everybody knew that it started on D, right? And so D became Re in this system because everybody knew that particular song that started with that. And then the next one started with Mi. And then there was another one that started with Fa. And those all started with different notes, and so he used those so that you would remember those notes and thus be able to do it. So it relied on a body of knowledge that everybody had. It relied on the fact that everybody knew those tunes, and thus then they could use those syllables to help them get that note. That's how he invented that system. There's going to be an interesting parallel here in Indian music that we'll get to in a bit. But back to the raga, you will find in your book a chart of the Melakarta system and the ragas. Okay? You'll find a figure that shows how Sa is always the same note, in this case C. And Pa, which is the fifth note, is always G. And there are only two options for Ma. There's F and F sharp. But if you look back at Ga and Re, there are a larger variety of options that can be used depending on which raga is being written and being used for the composition that's being performed. Okay? So you can follow that little map there, and you could choose any one of a large variety of different ragas that are being used for the piece that we're being shown. Now, on the rhythmic side of things, we have the Tala system, which is a series of metric accents in rhythmic patterns. Okay, and the most common groupings, as your text points out, there are really only 5 different talas that are actually used in Indian music, and you see the names of them in your text in the section on talas. There's the Adi tala, which has 8 beats to it, accents happening on 1, 5, and 7. So everybody clap. We're going to clap the Adi tala. Okay? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8. Okay? That's where the accents occur in the Adi tala. And as you look down the page, you find additional talas, the Rupaka tala, which is basically just a very short one with just 3 beats and 2 claps. The Chapu tala, which could be considered a division of 5, a metric repetition of 5, where the clap happens on 1, 3, and 4. And then the Misra Chapu tala, where the accents happen on 1, 2, 4, and 6. And finally, the Triputa tala, in which the accents happen on 1, 4, and 6. But there are, in this case, there are 7 beats. Okay, they're very similar in these last 2. If you look at the comparison of the Misra Chapu tala and the Triputa tala, they're very similar. So those are the ones that are used, and so by choosing a raga and a tala, you have all sorts of different possibilities of combinations to work with. And the book goes into a good deal of detail on how that works. The instruments that are going to be used here for the music that we're going to hear in the south of India, this is the Carnatic style, okay, are the Veena and the mridangam. The vina is the stringed, plucked instrument, okay, that is going to produce most of the melodic pitches, as well as the drone, which is known as the shruti layer. More about the layers in a little bit. The mridangam is a barrel-shaped, double-headed drum that is used for the rhythmic layer. Now, in the north of India, which is the Hindustani area on which we're not really going to focus, but some of the more famous Indian instruments are associated with the north. Anybody know what those are? Name a famous Indian instrument. Sitar is the first thing that comes to mind. What else? What about percussion? How about the tabla? Okay? The sitar and the tabla are probably the most well-known and famous Indian instruments. We're going to see some examples of that music, but we're not going to be focusing on it where your listening is concerned, because your CD focuses more on the south of India, the Carnatic style. So, but we will be hearing some music from the north. Be aware of the difference. Be aware of the fact that sitar and tabla are in the north, and that the mridangam and the vina are in the south. So that's the important thing for you to remember where it concerns the test in this class. The vina is a 7-stringed instrument of which the lowest 3 strings are designed to produce drones. And then the upper 4 strings are used to produce melodies. Now I want you to compare the idea of a drone string to the shamisen that we saw when we studied Japanese music. And you remember what the effect was created by that instrument's lowest string? A buzzing effect, which created an interesting overtone, a sympathetic vibration that created a very strange kind of effect. That's the effect that is created by the lower 3 strings on the vina, is that same kind of buzzing effect. Instead of being called sawari, as we heard it in Japanese, now it is jawari in Indian. So there's clearly a connection here, both in the linguistics and in the design of the instrument. And so on the vina, this is used to produce the drone effect that you hear in so much of the music of this style. Then the mridangam, the double-headed drum that's used in the Carnatic South. You see a picture of that in your text and also on the PowerPoint. 2 other instruments that are probably going to be used in this style as well. One of them is a shruti box. Anybody know what a shruti box is? It's basically an electronic instrument that produces the drone without having to rely on the lower strings of the vina, or on another instrument called the tambura that is also used to produce the drone. And so creating that drone is very important, but in later, more recent years, some musicians have relied on a shruti box, which basically just plugs into the wall and creates a synthesized version of the drone, or shruti, which underlies the entire performance of an Indian piece of music. And this is done for the same reason that you or I might buy a synthesizer and program in a piano accompaniment, so that we don't have to have an additional performer there to do that. Saves money, makes it easier to get to the gig, all of that stuff. Okay? So we see a Western influence here on traditional music with the shruti box. Okay, now, the Carnatic texture is a 3-part texture which consists of the melody, the shruti layer, and the rhythm layer. Okay, the melody layer is going to be played by the vina or by the vocalist if there's a singer. the Shruti layer is going to be performed by either the lower three strings on the veena, or by a tambura, or by a Shruti box. One of those options here. And then the rhythmic layer is going to be produced by the mandrungam. So it's a 3-layer texture. Now, you have an example on your CDs of a devotional song that contains these 3 layers. And so I want you to listen to this song and listen for those 3 layers to happen. But also, I want you to listen for the raga and the tala that are going on in this song. You'll find it on your CD, Devi Niye Tunai, okay? Devi with the fish-shaped eyes. A Devi is a goddess in this culture. And you'll find the text of this song in your book, talking about Devi with the fish-shaped eyes, one who dwells in the south, in Madurai, protect me. You are the one great beauty in the world who has captured the heart of the Lord of Lords, Sundaresa. And your text talks about the meaning of these words and the fact that this is essentially a religious devotional song in the Hindu style. The raga is the Kiravani raga, and you find that on the very next page of your text. And the tala is Adi Tala, which we clapped a few minutes ago, which has 8 beats with pulses on 1, 5, and 7. So, who might you listen to if you were trying to identify the raga in this song? Which instrument might you listen to? Okay, let me start backwards. Who would you listen to if you're trying to identify the tala, the rhythmic portion? The percussion, which is the mandrungam, right? What about the tala? What about the raga, if you're trying to identify the raga? The veena, yeah, or the vocal, okay? So by this combination, you should be able to identify the raga and the tala going on here. And you've got them notated in your text. See if you can see how that works as you listen to this music. So what vocal characteristics are we hearing here? Oscillation, absolutely. We're hearing the oscillation between different pitches. We see the representation of the graph that you have of an Indian note in your text, in which instead of sustaining a note, there is a great deal of oscillation going on whenever that note is performed. And we're hearing the 3-part texture. The Carnatic texture. We hear the drone Shruti layer, we hear the melody going on in the vocal in this case, and then we hear the drum, right, the mandrungam. Okay, and as you listen to it, you should be able to identify those accents. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2. Okay, if you continue to listen to this, you should hear those accents of the Adi Tala going on. Okay, so this is an example of a devotional song that handles this in a vocal way, where we hear the vocalist working. Any questions on this example? Okay. There's a style of music that I list on your PowerPoint that is not in your text. It's called Chinnamelan, and it is literally translates as small band. I just want you to be aware of it because it is a style that is prevalent in India, although we don't have examples from our text. But the instruments used are what make this very interesting stylistically. The Chinnamelans happen at weddings, openings of stores. The Nagaswaram, double reed pipes, are very common in this style. A Nagaswaram is going to sound a little like the suona, Chinese oboe that I played in class one day. Very loud. Very attention-getting kind of instrument. And then along with it, tawil drums and a shruti box drone. Okay, you can't get away from the shruti layer wherever you go in Indian music. So you can imagine what that's going to sound like in terms of getting people's attention in this style. But by far the largest musical example that you have on your CD in the four CD set is the example of Karnataka Sangita that comes next. Okay. This is the most classical designed style in India. Okay, in terms of classical music, if you wanted to think of Indian classical music, this would be it. The Karnataka Sangita. And in this case, we have an example on your CD called Sarasruha, which is to the goddess Saraswati, who is the goddess of music. And you see her picture in your text as you look through. The performance in your text is done by a very famous Veena player whose picture you will see in the text as it talks about this music. This piece lasts 22 minutes and 30 seconds. I kid you not. 22 minutes and 30 seconds. Americans do not typically have the patience to listen to a piece of music that lasts that long. Why is that? Why is it that we are in a culture that will not typically listen to a piece of music that's 22 minutes long? Yes?
I think television commercials have shortened our attention span.
Ah, that's a very good point. Television commercials, which typically last how long?
30 seconds.
30 seconds. 30 seconds. When I was a kid, there were TV commercials that lasted a minute and a half. You believe that? Yeah.
Didn't they repeat more often too?
They were just longer. But they discovered that they could still sell the product by only having a 30-second commercial and only have to pay a third as much money. So why have a minute and a half commercial anymore? They shortened them, and by so doing, many believe they have shortened Americans' attention spans accordingly. We don't like to wait for anything, do we? What?
We view time as money, so we don't necessarily...
Time is money. Yes. We invented the phrase time is money. Americans invented that phrase. Did you know that? Did you know that that term was invented by Americans? My colleague on the history faculty here at Missouri State, a retired faculty member named Robert Flanders, used to offer a telecourse on American history. And one of the things he would talk about, and this is a very interesting, I'm giving him credit for this because I want to make sure that people are aware where this came from, but the concept time is money is an American concept that came from the fact that when Europeans used to travel, If you wanted to go somewhere on a boat in Europe, you had to go to that port city and wait for enough people to gather to make it worth the while of the boat to travel. So you might have to stay there for weeks, and you got a hotel and you stayed for weeks until the ship was ready to sail because they had enough cargo and they had enough people to make it worth the company's money to do it. And then you went. Americans were the ones who came up with the plan, the boat leaves on this day at this time. And if you're not on it, too bad, you'll have to catch the next one. Time is money. So according to Dr. Flanders from the history department, that was a major change in culture. And so that whole concept. Other shortening of attention span things, yes. Pop songs are generally between 2 minutes and 30 seconds and 3 minutes and 30 seconds in length, depending on how many verses they put in there. But yes, those clearly are something that program us. Yes?
Fast food?
Fast food.
You want a meal? You can just go to McDonald's.
Yeah, fast food, and we want it yesterday. Yeah, we want it in a New York minute. What else?
Automobiles.
Automobiles. How does that...
Joel,
Takes less time to get from place to place.
Ah,
that's right.
Right.
They were first invented in the early 20th century.
Mm.
25 miles per hour.
okay.
Fast.
Yeah, we're used to having our car and be able to go where we want, when we want to, right? In a lot of other countries, you have to get on a train and use mass transit systems to get places. And then walk or bicycle, yeah.
Oh, it's like online shopping. You just click in the
Sure.
eBay.
Internet, online shopping, eBay, all of that stuff has a tendency to shorten our attention span. I got an email from somebody one time that said, I sent you an email 2 hours ago and I still haven't heard back. There is this expectation that because email can travel at the speed of light, that I must be able to travel at that same speed, right? Yes.
But I have a lot of cell phones.
Ah, yeah.
Just call someone anywhere.
Oh, sure. Yeah, well, all the cell phone stuff. Yeah, don't get me started on my cell phone talk because it goes on too long for this class. So we want immediate gratification, and there creates a clash between East and West. We don't have time to listen to a 22-minute and 30-second composition for Vina and Mendrungam, and that's what this is on this CD. I would encourage every one of you to find a way, find a time to listen to this whole piece. Find a time, try to find a time in your schedule when you can listen to a 22-minute and 30-second piece, because that's the only way that you will be able to comprehend it and appreciate it the way an Indian person would, who has a longer attention span. This music is very meditative in concept. And as you read your text, you find that an Indian music concert will go on all night. This 22-minute piece is only one of what would probably start at about 8 p.m. and would probably end up around maybe 7 a.m. to this concert. That would go on for a long, long time, yes.
Do they have the same expectation of how much attention you're putting in, though?
They do for the people that listen to this music. They expect you to be able to focus on this music for a long period of time. Yeah, yeah. As you look at this composition, you need to realize that there are several sections to it, and they discuss these sections in your book. As I mentioned, it's about Sarasaruha, who is, it is to the goddess Saraswati, and you see a picture that I've shown on the PowerPoint here. There is the central section of this piece is called a Kriti, and the Kriti is what is referred to as the main event. Okay, this is the central element of the piece and the one which you have been waiting for. Everything else is a prelude and a postlude to the Kriti. The Kriti in the performance that you have on your CD is entirely instrumental, but it is not originally that way. Originally, this Kriti would have had text with it, and everybody knows the song. Everybody who's listening to it knows the song, and so they don't need the text because they've heard it all their lives, and the tune and the words are ingrained. Okay? We have songs like that in our culture too. Right? All somebody has to do is play the tune to God Bless America, and you think patriotic thoughts, or at least you're supposed to, because right, that's what you've been programmed to do. Television commercials that have been playing for so long that you know what the product is. Sometimes they'll just play the tune, and no longer have to do the words at all. Right? Think of an example. Vonage. Okay, they play that little tune. Yeah.
Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there, and all they have to do is play the melody, right? It's called a logo. You don't even need the product name anymore. You just have to hear that music. So there are lots of great examples of this in our culture. This is the same way you should think about the Kriti in this Indian piece, because everybody knows the words that go with it, and so you don't even need it anymore. The composition is written in Natai Raga, which you find in your text. And the interesting thing about it is that its second scale degree has a characteristic shake to it. Okay, the re, which is the D sharp, on the way down, it has a little vibrato symbol there, which means that when it comes down, it has a characteristic oscillation or vibrato that goes on each time this particular raga is performed. And your PowerPoint is very helpful in this case, and I'd urge you to take a look at that, because what the PowerPoint does is to break this down into the components of the song, and it gives the CD timings as well. So the first section, the Alapana section, is an exploration of the raga, and it's very free form. It doesn't have the rhythm behind it. And you hear that particular raga being explored in terms of its intricacies and the particular flavor of those sounds. So in this case, the Mridangam has not even entered yet. Then the Mridangam is going to enter at about 3:20, and at that point it becomes more rhythmically defined, and yet the improvisation of the raga in the Veena part continues over the top of that. Let me play just a tad of the beginning of it so that you can get a sense of what this is like. I'm not going to play 22 minutes of music for you, though. A lot of oscillation going on here. You hear the Shruti drone going on, and you hear the exploration of the raga. Now, if you move ahead to about the 3:20 mark, you'll hear the Mridangam enter. Becomes much more rhythmically defined at 3:20. And then, if you move ahead to 8:25, Then the Kriti finally begins. So this is like the main event that you've been waiting for all this time. Everything else is just window dressing leading up to it. And now the Kriti, the moment that you've been waiting for, is finally here. So they make you wait 8 minutes and 25 seconds until you get there. Okay? They're really stretching your sense of time in this whole thing. Yes?
In our music, you only need they only give you 30 seconds to build up to.
Yeah.
Usually.
Yeah. We come from a culture which expects things much faster. But the thing is that by delaying gratification, the Indian musician makes it even that much sweeter when it finally arrives. That's the concept here, is to delay the gratification and make it even better. Have you ever done that for yourself? Delayed gratification. You really want that ice cream sundae. You really want that trip to Andy's frozen custard, but you're going to wait until you get your paper written before you go. You ever do that? No way. None of you have done that. Yeah. So some other thing that you really like to do, delay that gratification until it finally becomes so much better to get it that way. Something I want you to listen to too on this song is that the mridangam is very much tuned to a particular pitch, and so that when particular points are hit on this drum, it's very much a tuned drum which has been tuned to the Shruti layer, to the actual key in which the music is being performed. This is a characteristic not only of the mridangam in the south, but also of the percussion instruments in the north, and particularly the tabla. I urge you to spend the time to listen to Sarasaruha. Listen to the 22 minutes and 30 seconds that it takes to get through there. Put yourself in a meditative state in order to do that. It will make a difference in terms of how you perceive this music. We'll see you next time.